It was a Wednesday evening when Sarah first started feeling uneasy, though she didn't recognize the feeling for what it was until it was too late. The day had been relatively normal, nothing remarkable. She had come home from work, eaten a quick dinner, and settled in on the couch with a cup of tea and her laptop. Her husband, Tom, was working late at the office, so she had the house to herself. The quiet was comforting, even after a long day. Sarah had lived in the same suburban neighborhood for years, one of those places where it's safe to leave your front door unlocked, where people wave as they pass by and children play on the sidewalks. It was the kind of neighborhood where you never had to look over your shoulder. It was safe, or at least she always thought it was. But that night something felt off. Sarah couldn't put her finger on it, but the unease settled in her chest. The street outside was quiet, and the house was still, but there was a strange tension hanging in the air. She tried to brush it off. Stress, she thought. Maybe the weight of work was just getting to her. But as she sat there, scrolling through some emails, the feeling didn't go away. The sound of wind rustling the leaves outside the window became her background noise, almost soothing. But then from somewhere behind her, she heard something else. A thud. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. The sound seemed to come from the back door just behind the kitchen. Sarah froze. She couldn't rationalize it. Maybe it was just a branch or something else making noise against the house. But as the seconds ticked by, her stomach twisted into a knot. The sound came again, this time louder. Her heart raced. She set her laptop aside and moved quietly toward the kitchen, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The kitchen was empty, the back door just beyond the counter. She glanced toward the window, looking out into the backyard, trying to see what was causing the noise. The yard was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the porch light. She saw nothing. It was too dark to make out any shapes or movements, but the unease in her chest deepened. Someone could be out there. But why? Why would anyone be hanging around her house at this hour? Another thud, louder this time. It came from the direction of the back door. Sarah's breath caught. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, but she told herself to stay calm. She was imagining things. It had to be the wind, or maybe an animal. No one would be trying to break in. Not here. Not in her neighborhood. Still, the noises continued, each thud more distinct. Scraping. Testing the door. Her feet moved before she could stop them, bringing her closer to the back door. She slowly pressed her ear against the wood. The footsteps outside were soft but heavy, deliberate. Someone was out there. Her heart skipped a beat. She stepped away from the door, her mind racing. What should she do? Should she call the police? She glanced at her phone on the counter but didn't reach for it. Maybe it wasn't necessary. Maybe it was just some kids playing around, or a mistake. But the feeling of being watched, of being so vulnerable, wouldn't leave her. She felt a creeping sensation, like someone knew she was inside. Then just as suddenly as the noises had started, everything went silent. For a long moment, Sarah stood still, waiting. Her mind raced, spinning with thoughts of what might be happening outside. Was someone trying to get in? Or was it all in her head? She couldn't be sure, but that sense of dread gnawed at her gut. She finally grabbed her phone and dialed Tom's office, but there was no answer. She didn't leave a message. She wasn't sure what to say. "I think someone might be outside." The words felt foolish even as the anxiety climbed. The silence outside was worse than the sounds. It was suffocating. No footsteps, no sounds of movement. Just the faint creak of the house settling. The only thing she could hear was her own breath, shallow and uneven. Her thoughts swirled in circles. Should she go outside? Should she hide? Should she call the police? It was all happening too quickly. Her thoughts were jumbled, and her body was frozen in place. Then, without warning, she heard it again. A loud bang. It came from the back door, so loud and jarring that she jumped. The door frame rattled under the impact, and Sarah's heart nearly leaped out of her chest. Panic surged through her, and she backed away, her phone trembling in her hand. It was no longer just some strange noise. Someone was trying to break in. She felt an intense surge of adrenaline as she turned toward the hallway, heart pounding. The house felt too big now, too empty. The thought of being alone in it with an intruder was terrifying. The sound stopped again, a silence that felt impossibly heavy. And then she heard something she wasn't prepared for. A voice. "Hello?" it called, muffled but clearly coming from the hallway. It was a man's voice, low and chilling. "Is anyone home?" Sarah's stomach twisted. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to sneak in, they were calling out to her. They knew she was home. She didn't know what to do. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. Should she run? Should she confront them? Should she grab something to defend herself? Every instinct in her screamed to get out of the house, to flee, but she didn't want to make noise. The voice came again. "I know you're in there." Her blood ran cold. The air in the room felt thick. She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath, straining to listen. Her mind was racing, trying to think of a way to escape without being caught. Her phone lay forgotten in her hand. Then another noise, a creak of a door, the back door. Someone had opened it. Sarah's heart pounded in her ears as she took a tentative step toward the front door, inching toward safety. But just as she reached for the handle, her phone rang. Startled, she dropped it. She didn't dare to answer it. Whoever it was could be trying to find her. She couldn't risk making a sound. The footsteps grew louder now. Someone was moving through the house, slow and deliberate. Sarah pressed herself flat against the door, praying it would be over soon. But then, she heard the unmistakable sound of the back door creaking open wider. She was no longer safe in her own home. It was time to move. She yanked open the front door, nearly tripping over her feet in her haste to escape. She didn't look back as she sprinted into the street, not stopping until she reached her neighbor's house. Out of breath, her heart racing, she banged on their door with frantic fists. The lights turned on, and her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, opened the door, looking at her with concern. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "There's someone in my house," Sarah gasped. "Call the police, please." Mrs. Jenkins quickly called 911, and within minutes, flashing lights lit up the street. Officers arrived, securing the house, checking every window and door, but when they finally came outside, they said the same thing. "There's no sign of anyone inside, Sarah. No forced entry, no footprints, and no evidence of a break-in." Sarah stared at them, confused, her head spinning. The police were sure it had been a prank or a mistake, maybe even a neighbor messing around. But Sarah knew what she had heard. She knew what she had felt. As she sat on the neighbor's porch, still in shock, her phone buzzed. She glanced down at it, her stomach dropping when she saw the name. Brian. Her ex-boyfriend. Her fingers shook as she answered the call. "Brian?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hey Sarah, I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Her heart sank. She knew exactly what was happening now. Brian had never taken the breakup well. He had stalked her for months before she had moved in with Tom, and after the final confrontation, she had thought he'd finally let go. But as the memories flooded back, she realized that maybe she hadn't been as free of him as she thought. "You've been outside my house all night?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. There was a brief pause before he responded. "I missed you, Sarah. I just needed to see you again to make sure you were safe." Her stomach twisted with fear and disgust. The voice, the footsteps, the way he knew she was home, it all clicked into place. He hadn't left her alone, not even for a moment. The chilling truth sunk in. Brian had been inside her home, maybe even watching her the entire time. And the worst part, she realized with a sinking dread, that he wasn't done. He was still out there,